Hey guys, welcome to Rihanna's Lens, where I interact with you about the components in the STEM field and introduce you to fascinating people who passionately inhabit the scientific and technical frontiers of our society. My name is Rihanna Malhotra, and I'm absolutely elated to share this podcast with all of you. On this episode, I'm joined by a guest who's a treasure trove of experiences. She studied biomedical engineering with a chemistry minor at Florida International University, then went on to attend Umass Medical School for 1 year for the prep program. Then she attended Georgia Tech, one of the best, to get her master's in biomedical engineering. She was later opened up to a passion for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and is now pursuing a career in this area. I am so glad to welcome and introduce Natasja Hirbayashi. Thank you so much for coming on. I can't wait to begin our discussion.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me, Rana.
So before we get into this, I just wanted to ask you, what exactly is it that motivated you to get into the biomedical engineering field?
Yeah, so I think one interesting thing is originally I was marine biology. I did an internship at the Baltimore National Aquarium and I just fell in love with it. When I got to FIU, I learned that BME was a thing. I didn't really know that was a possibility before. And actually, one of my friends in high school, unfortunately, lost his limb due to a staph infection, so he has a prosthetic. And that, when I learned about prosthesis and the field of biomedical engineering, I was like, oh, I didn't even realize this was a possibility. And that's when I decided to switch my major because I found out, like, through BME, you can really improve the quality of life of those around you. And I really wanted to help those around me. So that was my initial interest, was prosthesis.
Yeah, I think having someone impact you is a good way to start and jumpstart to get into a field, because that's what really pushes you when you know that, oh, someone in my family or someone who was my friend went through this. So how can I do better to help them? And biomedical engineering, like you mentioned, there are prosthetics and there's tissue engineering, so many fields into this that there's one field that is doctors, and then there's another which is biomedical engineering, which is basically helping the doctors to build equipment. So I think that's what really helps a lot.
Yes. There's a lot of different directions that you can go within BME. So you can assist medical doctors, you can do research and get your own PhD. And there's a lot of different focuses or specialties within BME as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that I love about any engineering field is that there's so many ways to go. Like if you take mechanical engineering, you can always jump into biomedical because it still has that mechanics and how to build the things. So you can still jump into those different areas. So that's the best part about biomedical, about any engineering, in fact.
Yeah, and I think one thing, so what I saw within my graduate program, I specifically came from BME, went into BME, but that wasn't necessarily very common. Not every school has BME programs, but people came from biology, people came from mechanical engineering, people came from electrical engineering. It is the one thing that does make it a little bit difficult about, at least for teachers for biomedical engineering, because you have so many students that come from so many different backgrounds. It's kind of hard to teach because everyone's starting at a different place.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I can relate to this because right now I am currently going to apply to universities. So I was looking into the biomedical engineering field, but I saw that not a lot of universities have this as an undergraduate program. I think it's partly because it's a new field.
Yeah, it was developed in the late 1960s. Some schools started having departments, so it's definitely, that's new for science.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think this is just going to boom ahead because I just researched a couple of days back. It has, I think, a 24% growth rate in the future.
Oh, wow. You know that. I think, yeah, one area that's really booming right now is within machine learning. Mm-hmm. So you can essentially, I just took a class on this. It was one of my last classes in my grad program. So out of my realm of expertise, but really, really cool to learn about. It was essentially you're teaching machines how to learn, how to go through different algorithms to give you data or have like a prediction of an outcome. And as you know, biology is extremely complex. So being able to narrow down possibilities is helping science go a little bit faster, which is really important for drug development, drug delivery, discovery of different markers for different diseases, a plethora of different things.
Yeah, and what's funny about now, like these days, even if you take a biology field, you still have to learn some machine learning or coding, because that's basically the future and the world we are living in now. Everything around us is code. So there's just no escaping it. We have to learn it, even though it's not something that some people might find interesting, but it's just the way it is now.
Yeah, the cool thing about coding, and I guess the internet in general, is you can learn anything online. There's so many different coding websites. You can get a bunch of different certificates for free. I don't know, many different companies are actually dropping certain requirements for degrees because they're like, we just want to see that you have the skills. If you're able to code, we want you. So, I mean, you take one thing from this interview, learn how to code.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's just extremely important now. No matter what field you're in, just learn how to code. And like you said, what's best, it's online. You don't need to go anywhere to learn. It's just everything on YouTube, or even there are so many courses like edX. There's a platform, edX and Coursera. So there are so many places where we can learn from. And moving forward, so we're talking about, as I mentioned before, that there are so many engineering fields and they're so correlated. So could you show some light on how biotechnology and bioengineering differ from biomedical engineering?
Wow. So you said biotechnology and what was the other field?
Biotechnology and bioengineering.
Yeah, okay. So that is one thing that escapes me just a little bit because, so for example, at Georgia Tech, which is where I have my experience, the BME program goes between the medical school of Emory and the engineering school at Georgia Tech, versus bioengineering is just at Georgia Tech. So for me, because I wasn't in the bioengineering program, we have a lot of similar classes, but it seems that they are a little bit more engineering heavy, focused on the mechanics side, prosthetic development, device development, versus biomedical engineering, at least again, within my experience, seems to be more biology heavy. So you have the opportunity to do cardiac research, basic biology research, but you're approaching those problems with an engineering mindset. So through my experience, that's kind of the difference. But they're very much so intertwined, because even within BME, you can go to the device development side. It's really, the great thing about it is because it's so broad, you can go into the area, the specialty that interests you the most.
Oh, so have some people also gone into the medicine side after studying biomedical engineering?
Oh, for sure. A lot of people, so there's also programs called MD PhDs where you do them at the same time. I had a lab mate, actually, a brilliant student. He just loved to learn. You have to love to learn if you do an MD PhD program, right? And basically, at least how it worked at Emory was you did your first, I believe, a couple of years of medical school, and then a couple of years of, and then your PhD, and then your last 2 years of medical school. So it's kind of like an accelerated track for your PhD, which can be good or bad, but you still do all 4 years of your medical school. So people do that. People get their PhD and then go into academia, and they work right alongside with doctors. It really depends on your track and what your interest is. A lot of people just do PhDs, but they're focused on cancer biology, or they're focused on some kind of disease state that is really translational. So there's a whole category called translational medicine. So like the two big umbrellas are translational medicine and basic science. Basic science is really into the nitty gritty, like you're at the really tiny levels of biology, and maybe the information you find isn't translatable in terms of, okay, these are going to help patients, but it's going to be, this is going to help our understanding. So then eventually we can bring it to the translational level to eventually help patients. But the translational level is just like, you can directly correlate. I know, again, one of my cohort mates, well, ex-cohort mates since I graduated, she does direct translational to the point where she develops a part of the body that she develops with a 3D printer, and that actually gets inserted into babies to help with, I forget the exact disease state, but it's a deformation that they correct with what she creates. So it's directly translational. Really cool science. Material science is like the bee's knees, in my opinion.
Yeah, that sounds really amazing. But see, the thing is that now it can vary into so many fields, but since it's something that's new, biomedical engineering itself, so what are the job prospects? Can you get into biomedical engineering like when you're looking for a job immediately, or do you have to go into some other field for that?
So it's a bit of a interesting thing. So you're not, when you look for a career, you're not necessarily a biomedical engineer. You're a research scientist, you are a lab technician, or well, not necessarily lab technician, depending on the degree you get. I guess if you get like just your bachelor's, you could go into being a lab technician, a research associate. You can even go into consulting, which is really cool. So consulting is basically you get hired by other companies to help give your knowledge. So if it's a biopharm company, you can say, you know, this is the approach that you should go to. You should take X, Y, and Z. These are the experiments you should do. And then the company can either take your advice or ignore you, which is apparently one of the most frustrating things in consulting. According to one of my friends who is currently a consultant, she was like, I never really understood that. They hire us and then they don't listen. But that's another field you can go into. Let's see, what else can you go into as a biomedical engineer? There are just so many options. I think the main ones are the ones that I had already named. It's a lot of research. Quality control engineer you can go into. I think that's what one of my friends is doing right now. Yeah, it's a lot of research and development, those types of things. Especially with your bachelor's, a lot of people start off as a quality control engineer and then they work their way up to research and development. With your master's or your PhD, you can go straight into research or development because they see that you have that research experience.
Okay, I see. So now you went on from studying biomedical engineering to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So how did you relate anything of your education in biomedical engineering to your career now?
Yeah, actually, so recently, thank goodness, recently I was hired by the Umass Chan Medical School. They recently changed their name. In the Office of Health Equity, I'll be their program manager. So I'll be researching, developing, implementing, and then eventually analyzing the programs I put into place to improve diversity, equity, inclusion within the staff and faculty there. I'm very excited. So one of the skills, many of the skills are transferable. They really liked that I came from a STEM background because they're like, you know how to do research. And because you'll be working with staff and faculty that are coming from STEM backgrounds, that are working in STEM backgrounds, I don't know how to say this in a way that's a little bit more, they'll give me a little bit more respect, I guess, because they understand that, like, I understand what they're studying, not necessarily the exact science, but like, I understand the process of what it is, what it means to work within the STEM field. So I was really thankful that they liked that aspect of my background. Other skills besides just the research is, I think the resilience, because working in STEM and studying STEM, especially, you have a lot more failures than you do have successes, which is okay. It doesn't correlate with you as a person. It's just in science in general, you fail a lot. And you have those successes every now and then. And I think that's going to help me with DE&I, because even though it's an emerging field right now and everybody seems to be hiring within DE&I, it's a very frustrating field because it takes time to implement these changes for them to happen. So you have to have resilience, and you have to be able to know, like, you're not going to see that impact immediately. Your program is going to be implemented, and maybe a year later, 2 years later, you're going to see that it changed. So that resilience, I believe, is really going to help me. What else? There's just so many transferable skills. Science presentation. So like I said, I'm going to be analyzing my programs. Luckily, I'm going to be working with another office who does a lot of the analysis, data analysis, because that's their specialty. And then I will be presenting the work that they find. So of course, as you know, there's science communication, which is one of my favorite aspects of STEM, because I think if you're this absolutely brilliant human being, but you're not able to communicate your science at the level of, within layman's term to the general public, it doesn't really matter what you find, because the majority of the population is the general public. So I'm really excited to be able to translate what I'm doing to the general population of a university that, yes, if you explained high level science to them, they totally get it. But then you get to diversity, equity, inclusion, they might not get all of the concepts. I'm excited that I'm kind of going in the other direction where, yes, you guys are brilliant, but you don't necessarily have the background in this. Let me see if I can help you get to this point through the presentation of my data, of my statistics, of all of this analyzed data that, scientists, PhDs, medical doctors, that's what they want to see. They don't want the wishy-washy of, hey, kumbaya, let's get together, let's all be friends and accept each other, which is important. But they're like, but what do the numbers say? So I'm excited that I get to approach diversity, equity, inclusion through the lens of data analysis.
Yeah, it does sound really exciting. The way you described it is just amazing. And I'm really excited for you as well. It sounds like, I can't wait to hear what else comes into this field and area of expertise. So will you basically be looking at how to increase the numbers of diversity at the university itself, and how to be more inclusive of people?
Correct. So we're going to develop programs to be able to do that. We also want to create pipelines through HBCUs, for example, to get those HBCU scholars into our university. Once they graduate there, we want to get them, studying science at our university. We want the students that graduate from our graduate programs, because the interesting thing about Umass Medical School is we're just a graduate school. So it's graduate students, nursing students, and medical students. So once they graduate out, and we're also a hospital, we want them to go gain other experiences, but we want eventually for them to come back. So we're creating different pipelines to do that, different programs to bring in people to just visit the university and see, like, would this be somewhere you want to come? So like one of my ideas that I mentioned in my interview is to have some kind of banquet that not only do they bring invited scholars that already have their PhDs that are possible applicants to be working at the university, but to have them also bring one of their mentees. Because then their mentees can see, okay, Umass Medical School cares so much about DE&I that not only are they bringing my mentor, but they're bringing me to see, what work they're doing here, and how we can help with the work, or we can improve that, not just within DE&I, but within the science. Because at the end of the day, DE&I is important because it improves science. So there's literally been studies that show, so the National Academy of Sciences have shown that even though a group can be specialists in an area, if they're more homogeneous, the more diverse group actually does better, because you have different points of view that are coming in. You have different approaches to problems, and if you have multiple approaches to the same problem, you're taking different paths, and one of them is going to be faster. Versus if everybody thinks the same way, they might get lucky and they found the fastest approach, but most likely they didn't. And so that's why, like, we want to have these programs to show these students, like, this is why we care about it. Because yes, you are a diverse human being, and we care about that. But because you are that, you are going to improve the sciences. You're going to improve the quality of work that we do here. And at the end of the day, that's what we want to do within science. That's what we want to do within medicine, is improve the quality of life of society. And we do that through improvement of science and medicine.
Yeah, I feel like this is such an important career because it's important not only for now, but also later. Because think about the amount of changes we can make by bringing in diverse cultures into an area in general. So
Mhm.
imagine from someone from Southeast Asia and from Europe or from just anywhere around the world coming all together at a table and discussing how things differ in their ethnicity or in their traditions,
Mhm.
and how some device is important for them and how it's different for some other country. So just bringing everyone from across the world together to brainstorm on just a single idea and making a perfect model, I think that's so important. And we should have more diversity in STEM fields or just any career in general,
Yeah,
because it's going to help for the future, not just now.
exactly. And like you were saying earlier, if people go through different experiences, they have, someone that is their why, a family member or a friend. And culturally, geographically, people go through different things. They experience like there are higher rates of certain diseases in certain areas, and that's going to push forward someone possibly in their passion. Um, they're going to be able to see ailments and experience them in real life. For example, I unfortunately don't know his name right now, but there is a student who is trying to write a medical book just purely based on, how these ailments show themselves within Black individuals because they look different. There's textbooks that really you don't see Black individuals, so it's hard to um, maybe diagnose when your examples are all from the Caucasian perspective. Um, so, that diversity, that point of view is important to increase the education as well. So yeah, diverse backgrounds are extremely important because they have these passions that push them that are different than others.
Yeah, absolutely. That's an extremely interesting point because I just thought from a perspective of a younger child, of maybe of a different color other than Caucasian, and they're looking at a textbook and they're seeing just white people, and they're like, hey, but that's not how I look. What about
Mm,
me? How will this look if I had gotten this disease, or how will this seem for me? And
exactly.
then imagine a younger child thinking, oh, this just must be affecting white people. It's not for me. Then let's just skip this chapter. So I think it's really important that we bring diversity in even science art, like making diagrams of people from all across the world, not just white people. I think that's also extremely important. So I hope we all like work on this in the future and now as well.
100%. I agree entirely. Yeah, science art is also, it's another form of science communication, which again, like I said, is one of my favorite aspects of science. So science illustration is improving diversity within science illustration, like you said, is also extremely important. Representation in general is people need to see themselves to know that these issues can also impact me, or even within their medical doctors, like knowing like, okay, they come from a similar background than me ethnically, culturally, so they are going to respect maybe traditions that other doctors don't necessarily, not that they don't respect them, but they don't understand them. They can empathize, but they can't really truly understand, right? um, and also it's important for kids to see like that could be me. If you don't see yourself in these people's, it's harder to imagine yourself in those positions, which is another wall when it comes to diversifying STEM. um, yeah, so that's just another reason why it's so important because like you said, young children need to see themselves.
Right, yeah, because like we are all impacted by media a lot, especially like these days since TikTok is going about and just all the social media platforms are booming. So it's really important that we program that, channel that into at least media. And now there are like petitions going about. And recently, I think on Instagram itself, there was a fetus of a person of color. So, and a lot of people were proud that, oh, now it's something different. It's not just a white person carrying a baby. We can also see diagrams of a black fetus. So that was just amazing. I really love to see that.
Yeah, or even like something as simple as an emoji where they're,
Yeah.
not just yellow people. Like, and now there's people of all different. You can use the base yellow, which I like that they now made that the base was yellow rather than the base being someone that looks white.
Yeah.
So the standard is something that like no one is actually a pure yellow color, but you can pick a skin tone that represents you. So something as simple as that.
Yeah, exactly. So I think we're making progress slowly, and hopefully in the future it would all be diverse and equity. So I think your career is just perfect and it will just help everyone around you.
Yeah, I think one thing when I told my dad I wanted to go into this field, which he was very worried about, he was like, Natasha, you have a degree in engineering from Georgia Tech. Like, you're set. And I was like, okay, Dad, but I promise you that degree is going nowhere. I've got 2 degrees. They don't expire. If I want to go back into engineering, I totally can. But right now I want to go into DE9. And he's like, well, eventually you're not going to have a job because it's going to be diverse. And I was like, and that's the point. And that's the point. Like, hopefully my position isn't needed one day. That's what I want to do. Like, I want to work to get to that point. And then if that happens, I can go back to engineering.
I think it's perfect. You have engineering to fall back on and this amazing field to focus on right now. It's just perfect.
It's not, and it's funny to say that like my engineering is my fallback.
Yeah, I mean, usually it's the other way around, but
exactly. But it's you got to follow your passion. So I think that's one thing that I learned throughout my journey is I was interested in biomedical engineering, and I was really passionate about diversity within STEM, and I thought I wanted to be that diversity in STEM, and I still kind of do, but I think what I missed was my true passion was that diversity aspect. So that's one thing that you really need to make sure you're doing is following your passion. So, if the world was a bartering system, you could do whatever you want because you didn't need money, do that thing. Don't worry about the bag, worry about, your what's going to make you happy at the end of the day.
Yeah, definitely. And as being in the STEM field, did you experience any challenges or any discrimination since engineering is like mainly a male-dominated field? And so did you experience any fallback or any discrimination?
Wow, that is a loaded question. I think one thing that I experienced, just one example would be, not that there's like a bunch, but one example, the way that I write. I don't necessarily like to write in the way that science expects you to write, which in my opinion is like an old white male. Someone who sounds super pretentious, super educated. I don't write like that because I'm like, what is the point? It's hard to follow. It's not accessible to the general public. When you publish papers, everyone can read it. You can give it to anyone. If I want to give my paper to my mom to read, I want her to be able to at least understand and follow along. If I have a presentation, like a defense or a proposal, which I didn't need to do that because I did a non-thesis, but if I did, I want, and my friends and family can come, I want them to be able to follow along, right? So I think that was one thing where my mentor and I butt heads a lot, because they wanted me to write in a specific way. And I'm like, that's not how I communicate. And I don't know if that's necessarily discrimination, but one thing that I definitely see in science is they want a diverse background where we look diverse, but they want us to think the same way. And that defeats the purpose of diversity. We don't speak the same. We don't think the same. And that's what's bringing the good things to the table. It doesn't matter what I look like. Like, I mean, it does in terms of representation for kids and representation for the initial surface layer. But to get deeper than that, for me to make a real difference, is the way I think, is the way I speak, is the way I write. It's going to be different. But they wanted to streamline me. So that was the one place where I think we really kicking a wall.
Yeah, I mean, this has to change because having a white male's perspective for every single thing, that's just not how it's going to work. And I'm so sorry if you face any discrimination in your field because no one deserves to go through any of that. You deserve to get into a field that you're passionate about and focus on it regardless of what anyone says. And I'm glad that people are standing up now and getting into engineering or any STEM field because we have to break the stereotypes. And no matter what I know it's hard to say that no matter what anyone says, just push forward because it does pinch sometimes that like they're pulling you down. But in order to represent the people of your culture and ethnicity, we have to push forward.
100%. It's hard to go against the accepted, I guess, like terms and conditions of science, but it's important to do so.
Right, yeah. And speaking of which, lastly, is there any advice you would like to give to anyone wanting to join the same field as yours?
Know your why you go into it. Define that like very specifically. Because if you don't need a degree in that area, go to a different area. Go to something where you always want to, I don't know if this is a good advice, but you always want to build your resume. So build your resume for the thing that you want to do and why you want to do that thing. Because then you can go in a direction, you can build towards your career that's going to make you your happiest. So if you go into a graduate STEM program or an undergraduate STEM program, it's going to be hard. It's going to be really hard. You need to know why you're doing it. And that's going to help you get through it. You want to find the perfect prosthesis, the perfect way to fit people's prosthetics because your friend went through something. Remember that. Remember that when you're taking your Orgo 2 exam and you may have failed. Remember that when you have to retake a class because you failed it. It's okay. I had to drop a class before, and that's fine. Remember that when your experiment fails 10 times in a row. It doesn't mean you're a failure. It just means you're going through a hard major, and that's fine. You need to be trained to be resilient, especially if you want to be a scientist. So that would be my advice.
Yeah, that's some really great advice and so inspiring and motivating. So, well, that's it for today. Thank you so much for coming on. I had such a great time interacting with you. And to let all of you know, this podcast is now available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, RadioPublic, and all your other listening platforms. Well, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.